which Eichmann drove Jews from Vienna, Moravia and Bohemia in the winter of 1939. You will hear evidence of the theft of the property of the deportees, how they were left destitute in the zone, the brutal treatment to which they were subjected, and the expulsion of a number of them eastward beyond the Soviet borders with the threat that any attempting to get back would be killed. Eichmann personally dealt with the Nisko expulsions, even spending a number of days in the Nisko area. The project was finally abandoned because of the opposition of the governor of Poland, Hans Frank, who persuaded Goering that the project was upsetting the German war effort. The Nisko refugees later met their deaths in the Belsatz extermination camp. The attack on the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, and America's entry into the war on the side of the Allies some months later, in December of the same year, these were the turning points in the development of the plans for extermination. True, the idea had already been explicitly mentioned. We shall present to the court the minutes of a meeting called by Heydrich on September the 21st, 1939, in which Eichmann took part alongside other high SS officers, in which ways of dealing with Jews in the areas of conquered Poland were summarized. That very day, Heydrich issued instructions to all the special mission groups, Einsatzgruppen of the SS, that went along with the army and constituted units for special security missions. Their function was designated by Heydrich. After a warning that all his instructions were top secret, Heydrich went on to distinguish between the long-range solution of the Jewish problem, meaning by this, without any doubt, their actual extermination, and immediate steps to be taken against them. The Jews were to be expelled from the countryside and concentrated in the cities near railway junction points. And councils of elders were to be set up who would be made responsible for marshalling the Jews. As a pretext for these measures, Heydrich suggested it should be claimed that the Jews had been taking part in irregular activities and robberies. The severest punishment was to be inflicted for violation of the order to move into the concentration centers. According to the minutes of that meeting, Heydrich issued instructions that every judgment against violators in the zones of conquest that was not a death sentence should be reported to him personally. Orders were given to seize Jewish enterprises, to forbid Jews to change their places of residence, and to impose a curfew. Heydrich demanded regular reports on the operations carried out according to his instructions, concluding with these words: towards the achievement of the goals indicated, I order the immediate mobilizing of all the forces of the security police and security services. The chiefs of the Einsatzgruppen active in the same neighborhood will keep in close touch with one another so that all the possible areas will be completely and immediately covered by the network.
We shall see later, when we deal with the tragedy of European Jewry, how the conquerors interpreted these instructions, the brutality, murder and pillage that came in their wake. But it was only as the invasion of the Soviet Union drew nearer that the Germans went over to the final solution in the new sense, that is, utter physical extermination. On July the 31st, 1941, Goering instructed Heydrich as follows, I quote, "In order to complete the mission imposed on you in the order of January 24, 1939, to solve the problem of the Jews by means of emigration or evacuation in the most suitable way in the circumstances leading to a possible solution. I am herewith instructing you to make all the necessary organizational, practical, and material preparations for a comprehensive solution of the Jewish question within the German area of influence in Europe. Insofar as the other central authorities are concerned, they are to cooperate. I hereby instruct you further to submit to me soon a general plan, Gesamtentwurf, with respect to organizational, practical, and material means necessary for the execution of the desired final solution and Lösung of the Jewish question." Thus, the official signal was given. Heydrich was appointed to plan the extermination, and he, on his part, appointed for the planning and execution a cruel and fanatical man, implacable in his enmity, this evil Eichmann. As a preparation for the final solution, fresh occupation units had already begun mass murders of Jews in zones from which the Red Army had retreated in the summer and autumn of 1941. We shall go into these actions in a later section. Partial and mass expulsions towards the east had already been carried out earlier from within Germany proper. But at that time the work of general planning was being done in Berlin. In August 1941, Eichmann wrote to his Foreign Office that it would be advisable to prevent further immigration, and I quote, "in the light of preparations for the final solution of the problem of European Jewry." These preparations of his were completed before November of that year, since already then he wrote in the same connection about the imminent final solution, I quote, "That summer we shall find Eichmann in Auschwitz, arranging with Rudolf Hess the various technical details and choosing the spot for the erection of the extermination apparatus." In the autumn of that year, Eichmann flew to Kiev to report to Himmler. Himmler seems to have received a suitably satisfactory report, since on October 27, 1941, he issued a decree forbidding an emigration of Jews from the areas of German rule. 2 days earlier, on October 25, 1941, an official in the Ministry for the Occupied Territories wrote that an agreement had been reached with Eichmann to use gas chambers for the solution of the Jewish people. Thus we meet the plans, and they had been formulated, the means had been determined. Instead of Jewish immigration, they would be murdered. From then onwards, it was the job of the head of the Jewish section of the Gestapo to direct in a suitable fashion the planning of other offices of the Reich, according to the detailed master plan that had already been sketched in September 1939. On September 15, 1941, the accused sent along for Heydrich's signature instructions applying to Germany and the occupied zones, requiring the introduction of the Jewish badge, which had been imposed some time before in the eastern occupation zones. Every Jew would have to wear on the left side of his breast a special, easily recognizable sign. The Jewish authorities themselves would have to supply the badge of shame. A ban was imposed on Jews leaving their places of residence and using transportation, with some clearly specified exceptions. But there were also problems. Rosenberg, Minister for the Occupied Territories, issued a series of directives for the occupation authorities in the areas under his jurisdiction, which included the Baltic countries, East Poland, and parts of the Soviet Union. These instructions were called the Braune Mappe, the Brown Portfolio, and included a chapter relating to the Jews containing severe repressive provisions, but not extermination. Problem of the Jews, the Braune Mappe said, will find a solution in the whole of Europe at the end of the war. When a draft of the Brown Portfolio came to Heydrich's attention, he reacted with a highly significant letter dated January 10, 1942. He did not agree with Rosenberg's proposals. He insisted that the special instructions already issued, which included complete extermination as we know, be taken into account. And I quote, "In view of the fundamental lines of policy for dealing with the Jewish problem as formulated by the Reich Central Security Office in charge, SS Sturmbannführer Eichmann, I must ask you to reprint your instructions." Unquote. In the same month, Heydrich sent on to Rosenberg the revisions suggested by Eichmann. Because of the importance of this document, I shall quote from it at length. All measures in connection with the Jewish question in the occupied territories in the East are to be considered from the point of view that the Jewish question must be generally solved for the whole of Europe. Hence, such measures in the occupied territories in the East as contribute towards the final solution of the Jewish question, and thereby the liquidation of Jewry, must in no way be hindered. Ausscheidung des Judentums. In the occupied territories in the East in particular, efforts are to be made to bring about a most immediate solution of the Jewish question. Any measures of the local population against the Jews are therefore not to be hindered, so long as measures that will contribute to the liquidation of Jewry have not yet been taken. The local Jews are to be strictly separated from the rest of the population. Free movement is to be immediately stopped for all Jews. Transfer of Jews to ghettos is to be carried out. The watching of the boundaries between the ghetto and the outside world is the affair of the police. The measures that contribute to the liquidation of Jewry are to be carried out without any consideration for economic needs. All Jewish property is to be registered. Transfers of property by Jews are to be prevented. Unquote. But the matters were not arranged by a mere exchange of letters. Frank, the Governor-General of occupied Poland, tried to deal with Jewish affairs in his own way and to take the matter out of the Gestapo's hands. In other areas too, difficulties arose. Eichmann therefore proposed that a meeting be called of the senior central officials who might be considered suitable to carry out the plan of slaughter. and Heydrich agreed. It was Eichmann who made all the preparations for this conference, from the preparation of all the factual material to the drafting of the invitations. And those invited were asked to take time off from their duties, and I quote, in view of the exceptional importance of the problems and of the need to arrive at a unified point of view.
The conference took place on January 20th, 1942 in the suburb of Wannsee near Berlin. The participants were the leading personalities with the rank of Director General of the Ministries for the occupied territories in the East, the Interior, Law, Foreign Affairs, Economics, Race and Settlement. Representatives of the party, RSHA, and the Reichskanzlei, and of course Adolf Eichmann. Heydrich delivered the central speech according to the data supplied by the accused. He recalled Göring's order and established at the outset, in order to prevent any doubts, that it was his ministry that was centrally responsible for the execution of the final solution everywhere without any geographical limitations. He mentioned the practical experiments that had been carried out in the East, the lessons from which were of the utmost importance for the final solution. After having briefly outlined the steps taken thus far, in quotes, in the battle against this enemy, unquote, for the purpose of forcing the Jews out of the areas in which the German people lived and which constituted its Lebensraum, he stated that a halt had been called to this emigration at the order of Himmler, and that now would begin further what to do with children of mixed marriages. As I have already indicated, this problem troubled the executors of the extermination. The principle is established that children of mixed marriages of the first degree, namely which one of the parents was Jewish, would be classified as full Jews, excluding men who had married German women and had children, or those with respect to whom there were exceptional circumstances, and for whom the higher institutions of the party and the state had specially interceded, but such circumstances were to be examined with great care. The exceptional cases were to be permitted to stay in Germany on condition that they gave their consent to their own sterilization. Instructions were also given with respect to children of mixed marriages of the second degree, the mixed couples themselves, and various categories of borderline cases. The Economics Ministry asked that for the time being, Jews working in vital war industries should not be evacuated, and Heydrich agreed. Dr. Bühler, representative of the Polish general government, gave notice that there the final solution had already begun. Asked that the problem be solved with all possible dispatch, and declared that the majority of the Jews in his region, about 2.5 million, were not capable of work at all. He agreed that the implementation of the final solution be put into the hands of the Gestapo, and promised full support by the authorities of the general government. He asked only for the work to begin as rapidly as possible. Later opinions were exchanged on, I quote, the various means connected with the possibilities of a solution, unquote, and the representative of the government of the eastern areas, like the Polish general government representative, asked that preparations already made in his areas be completed, but without stirring up panic among the population. This was afterwards given the seal of legal authority. Tirak, the German Minister of Justice, stated that in order to free the body of the German people of certain elements, including the Jews, he was therewith transferring the punitive authority over them to the Reichsführer SS Himmler, and he added, quote, I am proceeding on the assumption that the judicial processes can contribute but little to the extermination of these elements of foreign origin. It is true that severe verdicts are now being rendered against these people, but this is not enough to bring about the aforementioned result. There is also no sense in keeping them in prisons or internment centers. On the other hand, the delivery of these people to the police, which will be unfettered by the criminal statutes, will get much better results. Unquote. This was the final victory of anarchy over justice. Here National Socialism arrived at the ultimate stage in its degeneration. In order to destroy the Jews, it openly surrendered the very existence of the law, an act for which there is no precedent in juridical annals. Even earlier, on January 6, 1942, Himmler had transferred the authority to pass the death sentence and to give instructions for special handling, Sonderbehandlung, to the head of Section 4 of the SS Ministry or to his representative. We shall see that Eichmann was the man who actually used this authority in Himmler's name. Detailed directives were given relating to the executions and the submission of reports on them in concentration camps and other places. I have already said that as early as 1941, Heydrich had appointed Eichmann to plan and carry out the extermination program. A renewed endorsement of this choice is found in a letter by Heydrich dated March 2, 1942, prepared by the accused section, in which notice was given of the Wannsee Conference, which, in quotes, to their general satisfaction, revealed a complete unity of opinion concerning the practical steps to be followed for the purpose of implementing the final solution, unquote. The Foreign Office was asked to appoint its representative to a meeting called for March 6, 1942, by Heydrich's appointee for this purpose, Obersturmbannführer Eichmann. The Foreign Ministry sent Rademacher as its representative. The program thus went into its practical phase. At this stage, Eichmann is already the only one in charge. We shall see him now more frequently than before, together with his band of Confederates, combing Europe from the Atlantic Ocean to the Aegean Sea, in order to assemble the Jews together and dispatch them to death. With the help of his deputies in all the countries of Europe, he held the Jewish people in his grip like an octopus strangling its prey. Henceforth, Eichmann is not only active as one of the directors of a department in the RHSA, he is the personal representative of Heydrich, regarded by the Reich authorities as the Commissar for the solution of the Jewish problem. The court should note the unusual form taken by this appointment. Goering, the second man in the Reich, acting in this matter no doubt with the authority and in the name of Hitler, goes over the head of the Reichsführer SS Himmler directly to Heydrich and makes him responsible for the solution of the Jewish problem. Heydrich, in turn, goes over the head of the Chief of Bureau 4, Miller, and appoints Eichmann directly as his representative. This appointment granted Eichmann immeasurable power, supported by the order of the Führer himself. There is evidence that Eichmann had in his possession a written document containing Hitler's order for the extermination of the Jews. This order is not in our possession. But it is beyond any doubt that the unusual character of his appointment raised Adolf Eichmann to a unique position, invested with tremendous authority, enabling him to contact heads of governments and ministers, to issue orders and instructions in all matters relating to the destruction of the Jewish people.
We shall see his issuing detailed directives for the implementation of the deportations to Auschwitz. We shall trace the activities of his men concerned with the supply of gas for killing of Jews. We shall find him negotiating with the representatives of the puppet governments in order to persuade, to stimulate, to spur on the work. Everywhere he was the official authority for murder and plunder, and all reports had to be sent to him. We shall look for his name in vain among the speechmakers at the central conferences, possibly because the superiors Himmler and Heydrich, who had chosen him with care and deliberation to do the work of butchery, did not want to have him speak in the company of the professors and university graduates who took part in those consultations. It may be that he himself took no great interest in talk, having devoted himself with unlimited fanaticism and zeal to action. Towards that goal, he would not hesitate to come into conflict with, and sometimes even to mislead, men in positions higher than his own in the Nazi hierarchy. But this did not bother him at all, since he was sheltered in the shadow of the omnipotent Himmler. He treated with open contempt the ministers and envoys of occupied states. By means of persuasion, threats, or compulsion, he got from them what he wanted: the enactment of laws depriving the Jews of human and civil rights and rounding up of Jews and their concentration in ghettos, their deportation to the extermination centers. Everywhere he adapted himself to the needs and circumstances of the moment, but his persistent and cruel pressure was successful. Everything relating to the extermination and the preparations for it was his concern. We shall see him visiting and inspecting the Warsaw and Lodz ghettos. We shall follow him as he travels in the autumn of 1941 to Globotnik, chief of the SS and the police in the Lublin region, in order to transmit to him personally the secret command for the physical extermination of the Jews. Then he was also in Treblinka and in Chelmno, where gases were used for the extermination. He witnessed in Chelmno the parade of the naked Jews who had been stripped of their clothing and were waiting their turn for death by asphyxiation with gas. He looked on as gold teeth were extracted from the mouths of his dead victims. He inspected the system of extermination by means of cars expelling gas from their exhausts in that early phase of the mass killings. He was sent to examine the extermination activities by shooting used by the Einsatzgruppen. He saw the murderers in Minsk shooting their victims in the back so that they fell into ready graves. He saw these groups murdering women and children. He saw those units operating against the Jews in the vicinity of Lvov, where the blood spurted from the grave as from a spring, to use his words. But direct murder by shooting did not satisfy him. Our men will become sadists, he said. In another place he put it that the method was not elegant enough for the purpose. He had to seek a new method. This was found in the gas chambers and furnaces of the extermination centers, which he visited on a number of occasions to examine the apparatus, to organize the transportation procedures, and to give instructions. There he also saw how corpses were burned in the open field. Now that these instruments of extermination, it seems, were functioning to his satisfaction, he concerned himself with supplying them with sacrificial victims. His section from time to time issued detailed directives relating to the death transports. The instructions apply to all the Jews, except for those exempted by his section IVB4. There were special instructions relating to Jewish property. The deportees were forbidden to take with them anything of value. We shall submit to the court proofs of the requirement to send reports about expulsions to Eichmann's section. This requirement of report about the implementation of the extermination program was imposed on the commander of Auschwitz, among others. Thus Eichmann knew at any time who had been sent to Auschwitz, who were the candidates for execution, and who had already been killed. Eichmann's section would even issue detailed instructions as to when certain people were to be sent to the death chambers. Truly, one can say of him in the language of the scriptures, where the slain are, there is he. We shall prove that Eichmann and his section became the central authority for all the Reich ministries in regard to Jewish affairs. All apply to him, and his fiat is decisive. The foreign ministry asks Eichmann to keep alive 30,000 Jews with foreign citizenship so that they may be exchanged for Germans living in their countries. When it seems to him that Romania is permitting the exit of Jews with means, he warns the foreign ministry that very soon none but impoverished Jews will remain in that country, adding, and I quote, "In order to implement the final solution of the Jewish problem without any impediments and according to plan, I hereby request that this development be restrained by suitable means, and likewise that I be kept notified of the state of affairs," unquote. The intention is clear. There is a danger that in Romania murder will be done without plunder, and of course the final solution was not planned that way. Even when the Slovakian government, which ruled by grace of the Nazis, expressed shock at the rumors of what had happened to the Jews of that country who had been deported nominally to work in the East, and asked permission for one of its representatives to visit the labor camps, Eichmann turned down the request and suggested to the foreign ministry that it explain to the Slovakian government that all was well with the deportees, and proofs were given in the form of postcards received from them and articles on the subject published in the press, which Vyslitseny, the advisor for Jewish affairs in Bratislava, would be glad to supply. The German ambassador to Bratislava received another request for permission to visit the camps, and Tuka, head of the Slovakian government, intervened. The foreign ministry again approached Eichmann with a request to permit the visit, but Eichmann refused. His refusal is understandable. The Jews they wanted to visit were no longer alive. Eichmann took special pains to frustrate emigration to Palestine. He had obligations on this subject. A report about a boat from Spain was handed over to him, and regarding property confiscated in Salonika from Jewish citizens of Spain reaches his desk. The German Foreign Ministry apologizes to him for daring to give instructions concerning Jews to the Vichy administration in France after the German invasion, and explains that it did so only because of the urgency of the matter and Eichmann's absence from Berlin at that time. Eichmann had special interest to fail the immigration to Palestine. He had obligations on this subject, he argued, to the Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, whom he had met and with whom he had established contact. The impression these two men made on each other was so strong that al-Husseini asked Himmler to provide him, after the war, when he would enter Jerusalem at the head of the Axis troops, with a special advisor for Eichmann's department to help him to solve the Jewish question in the same way as it had been done in the Axis countries. Mr. Hausner, may we adjourn at this point? Eichmann offered the job to his assistant, Wislizeny. A few moments more, please.
Does this base the issue of competence for the court in Israel?
Not following.
The government of Argentina inquired about one of its citizens, Gerson Vollner, who lived in Lvov, and the German Foreign Ministry asked Himmler himself to take into account their special relations with Argentina and not send the man to a concentration camp. The cynical answer of the accused was that the Jew in question had died of a weak heart, despite the excellent treatment he had received for his ailment. In 1942, Eichmann decided to treat the Hungarian Jews resident in the Reich in the same way as German Jews. The Foreign Ministry, which was then at the height of a political controversy with satellite Hungary, did not agree. But Eichmann did as he wanted. We shall see him spurring on his officials and assistants to finish the job quickly. He was impatient with any delay. Once when a deportation train from France did not leave, he declared that such things were not permitted to happen under his command, and if hindrances of this kind were to recur, he would have to consider whether or not to dispense with France as a country to be cleared of Jews. His subordinate Röttger was of course appalled by this threat, lest God forbid he might be blamed for the survival of French Jewry, and he apologized and promised that thenceforth all would go well. When Knochen, an official of the security police, had trouble with the army when trying to introduce the Jewish badge into Belgium, he asked Eichmann to use his influence with General Raeder, chief of the military administration in occupied Belgium, to agree to its introduction. When he learned from a secret source that the Jew Golub in the Drancy camp in France was about to be granted a Latin American citizenship that would enable him to emigrate, Eichmann cabled the Gestapo headquarters in Paris, ordering them to dispatch Golub quickly to Auschwitz. When the German Foreign Office interceded with him to save individual Jews in whom for one reason or another the occupation authorities were interested, such as Roger Mass, a senior French officer who was captured and imprisoned as a Jew, or the Greek citizen Jan Cuenca, or many others, his answer always was that for reasons of principle, the request should not be granted. At times, another reason is given by the accused in his section for turning down requests of the Foreign Office. The Jewesses Vialika and Belsica, those Swiss citizens, cannot be permitted to leave the general government because they know about the methods used for implementing the deportations. A representative of the Hungarian press agency in Warsaw, the Jew Rosau Szilai, cannot return to Hungary because he has seen many things in Warsaw that he would no doubt report in a manner inconvenient for Germany. He would therefore be sent to a concentration camp. The commander of the Army of Occupation in France was asked to permit the entry of German Jews to